The story of the company that killed video rental and almost killed itself. How did a company that began with envelopes and DVDs turn into a machine that reshaped television, the film industry, and the very model of how people consume entertainment? Who came up with this business? Why did Netflix at one point want to sell itself for just $50 million? How did Blockbuster get a chance to buy the future and let it slip away? Why did Netflix nearly burn its own reputation to the ground with the Qwikster fiasco? And how did a service that spent years building itself around an ad-free subscription model eventually move into advertising, games, and live broadcasts? Envelopes, a subscription with no late fees, an almost sale to a competitor, an IPO in a falling market, a bet on streaming before its time, public humiliation, original production, a war with the studios, a failure that wiped out tens of billions in market capitalization, and then a new surge, after which Netflix stopped being measured only by subscriber numbers. Who came up with Netflix? Netflix was founded by Hastings and Marc Randolph. The company's official history dates its start to 1997. They came up with the idea of mailing DVDs, tested the hypothesis literally on themselves, mailed a disc to themselves, and the disc arrived intact. By that point, Hastings already had deep experience in software and money from the pure software deal, while Randolph had a strong background in direct marketing and catalog retail. This was not a creative studio or a Hollywood company. It was a pairing of an engineer and a distribution-minded operator. Another point matters too. Netflix was not born as a streaming platform. It was born as a logistics business, not about creativity, about delivery, not about the art of cinema, about convenience, not about directors, about habit. At first, they weren't selling movies. They were selling the absence of a penalty. At the start, Netflix was more ordinary than it seems today. In 1998, the service launched as a DVD by mail rental business. But the real turning point came later, when the company abandoned the pay-per-disc model and moved to subscriptions. In 1999, Netflix introduced a subscription model with no deadlines and no penalties. And then, in 2000, launched an unlimited plan. A fixed monthly fee, no late fees, no agony over overdue rentals. In the first months after the subscription launched, rental volume surged. This was where Netflix made its first truly major move. The company did not simply make video rental easier. It cut out the most humiliating part of the experience, and the most profitable part for the old players, the late fee. For customers, it was liberation. For Blockbuster, it was the beginning of the end, when Netflix wanted to sell itself. Today it sounds almost absurd, but in 2000, Netflix was not a triumphant company. It was a troubled startup against the backdrop of the collapsing dot-com market. Money was tight, the model did not yet look rock solid, and the founders went to Dallas to offer Blockbuster a deal. Buy Netflix for about $50 million. Marc Randolph later told this story in detail himself. The scene was almost cinematic. After Netflix named its price, Blockbuster's CEO, according to Randolph's recollection, was struggling not to burst into laughter. They had come to sell themselves. They were practically laughed at. And it was one of the most humiliating moments in the company's history. But this was exactly where Netflix's business drama sharply changed direction. While the giant was laughing, the small company realized one simple thing. If no one was going to save it, then instead of selling itself to the market, it would have to break the market itself. How Netflix went public, and why it wasn't about glory, but survival. In May 2002, Netflix went public on NASDAQ. The company sold 5.5 million shares at $15 each and raised $82.5 million. In hindsight, that looks beautiful, but at the time the IPO was not a victory parade. It was a way to get air. By the end of 2002, Netflix had about 857,000 subscribers, and by April 2003, the company had already crossed the 1 million mark. Growth was fast, but not because of any magic of the brand. It was driven by logistics, the convenience of the subscription, and iron discipline in unit economics. Netflix was learning not only how to acquire customers, but how to retain them through habit. And it was during these years that another important internal shift took place. Marc Randolph, Netflix's first CEO, handed the role over to Reed Hastings. Later, he would say, "It was probably the best decision I ever made at Netflix." The startup was beginning to move out of the invention phase and into the scaling phase, and that requires a different breed of management. A DVD company decided to kill DVDs. The most powerful thing about the Netflix story is not that it invented the subscription model. The most powerful thing is that it decided to kill its own successful business before someone else did. Netflix launched streaming in 2007. At first, it looked modest. Only about 1,000 movies available to watch online, versus tens of thousands of DVDs in its mail-order catalog. But inside the company, they already understood. The future was not in envelopes, but in instant delivery over the internet. Later, Reed Hastings would say something that explains a great deal about Netflix's logic. For the past 5 years, my greatest fear at Netflix has been that we wouldn't make the leap from success in DVDs to success in streaming. This is not just a quote, it is a strategic diagnosis. Netflix was not afraid of competitors. Netflix was afraid of its own past. That was the brutality of the model. You build a profitable system, and then you begin undermining it yourself, because you understand, if you do not do it, someone else will do it to you. The moment Netflix publicly lost face. But no amount of foresight makes a company immune to its own mistakes. In 2011, Netflix raised prices and then decided to split off its DVD business under a new brand, Qwikster. Customers were effectively asked to live with 2 services, 2 websites, and 2 different usage logics. The reaction was catastrophic. Hastings came out with a public admission. "I messed up." The mistake turned out to be very costly. According to Reuters, the Qwikster episode cost the company around 800,000 subscribers and crushed market confidence. Shares that had traded above $300 in the summer of 2011 had fallen to about $62 by November. This was not just a failed rebrand. It was a rare case in which the market saw in Netflix not genius, but arrogance and poor communication. And yet, even this failure did not cancel the main point. Qwikster was executed terribly, but the underlying bet on streaming was right. Netflix got the form wrong, not the direction. When Netflix stopped being a rental service and became a studio, the next blow to the market was even stronger. Netflix understood that being merely a distributor was dangerous. As long as you depend on other people's libraries, you are renting your own growth. That meant moving into original content. In 2013, House of Cards became the first major online series to receive major Emmy nominations. That was the moment when Netflix stopped being seen as a convenient online video service and started being seen as a real force in the industry. After that, it was no longer just expansion, but a war for Hollywood. Netflix was no longer asking for content. It began ordering it, then producing it, then globalizing it. And in 2016, the company expanded its streaming service into more than 130 additional countries all at once. That was the transition from a strong American business to a global platform. That was when it became clear. Netflix was not just changing the way people watch series. Netflix was changing who controls the path of content from idea to viewer, the fall that should have scared everyone. It seemed that after that, Netflix was unstoppable. But in 2022, the market delivered a reminder: even giants bleed. In the spring of 2022, the company reported its first quarterly decline in subscribers in more than a decade, down 200,000 instead of the expected growth of 2.5 million. After the report, the market instantly wiped about $40 billion off its market capitalization. For a company that had been seen for years as the model winner of the streaming era, this was not just a weak spot. It was a public slap in the face. And at that point, Netflix had to break its own dogmas. The company began moving seriously into advertising and took a much harder line against password sharing, which it had tolerated until recently as part of user culture. What had long been treated as nearly taboo suddenly became an anti-crisis strategy. This was a very important psychological turning point. Netflix could no longer live only on the myth of endless subscription growth. It had to relearn how to monetize the audience it had already conquered. The second reinvention: advertising, games, live content, and new math. Remarkably, this crisis did not break Netflix. It reshaped it. In 2024, the company reported that its ad-supported plan helped attract 9.3 million new customers in the first quarter alone, bringing its global base to 269.6 million. Then, Netflix stopped treating subscribers as its main public fetish altogether. In 2025, the company officially ended regular reporting on membership numbers and asked the market to focus primarily on revenue and operating margin. And the numbers turned out to be heavyweight in a very adult way. For full year 2025, Netflix reported $45.18 billion in revenue, $13.33 billion in operating income, and $10.98 billion in net income, with an operating margin of 29.5%. This is no longer a story about how many people watch series. It is a story about how a media company prints money on a global scale. At the same time, Netflix was expanding into new zones. Games launched globally in 2021. In 2024, the service moved into live content and signed a multi-year deal for WWE Raw, worth more than $5 billion. At the end of 2024, it held its first NFL Christmas games, which averaged more than 30 million global viewers per game. This is no longer just streaming. It is an attempt to become a universal entertainment machine. Today, Netflix describes its scale without modesty. The company says it entertains more than 500 million people in more than 190 countries and in 50 languages. This is no longer a service. It is infrastructure for global attention. What kind of story was this? The story of two founders who did not begin with Hollywood, but with shipping disks. The story of a model that knocked out the old market's favorite source of profit, the late fee. The story of a company that, at a weak moment, offered to sell itself for $50 million and was nearly laughed out of the room. The story of a business that decided to kill its own DVD success for the sake of streaming before the market was ready for it. The story of a mistake called Qwikster, after which Netflix lost hundreds of thousands of customers, but did not abandon its chosen course. The story of a platform that first stormed television with House of Cards, then moved into global content, then into advertising, games, and live programming, and now lives by the metrics of a large, highly profitable media machine. The real story of Netflix is not the story of TV series. It is the story of how a company repeatedly managed to betray its own past before that past could betray it first. And perhaps that is exactly why it is still alive at a moment when Blockbuster has long since become nothing more than a symbol of someone else's hubris.